He had millions in his bank account, but not a single soul to light a candle for him, no calls, no hugs, just a silent mansion, echoing with everything he tried to forget, on the one day meant to celebrate his life. He felt more invisible than ever before, but just when he thought the world had forgotten him completely, someone knocked, not a friend, not family, not a business partner, but a girl, with no home, no shoes, and a cake that cost her everything she had. What happened next wasn't just a birthday surprise, it was a moment that shattered a billionaire's pride and rebuilt his entire life, stay until the very end. Because this isn't just a story about a cake, it's about the one thing we're all quietly searching for, a reason to feel alive again. He had everything, except someone to say, "Happy birthday." Behind the marble walls of a mansion that could rival any Hollywood estate, Michael Rivers, a 54-year-old tech billionaire, sat staring at the clock. The room was silent, too silent, not the peaceful kind, but the hollow kind. The kind that echoes. It was his birthday, but the only sound that greeted him was the soft ticking of a $40,000 designer clock and the distant hum of appliances no one used, no music, no laughter, no family. No friends, just a man, sitting at a 12-seater dining table with no candles, no balloons, and no calls from anyone who actually meant something. His phone lit up once, with a push notification from his bank reminding him that his net worth had increased overnight. But no one had remembered his heart. Michael had spent his entire life building empires, apps, real estate, private equity. He could buy islands with the money he had. But in that moment, with the sun slipping beneath the horizon and shadows climbing up the walls, he'd never felt poorer. He leaned back in his Italian leather chair, took a slow sip of aged bourbon, and asked himself the question that had haunted him for years. If I disappeared today, would anyone notice? He remembered a time when birthdays meant something. His mother would bake a chocolate cake, half burned, half undercooked. But it was perfect because it was made with love. Back then, money was tight, but hearts were full. Now the roles had reversed. Everything around him screamed luxury, except his soul. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city light up for everyone else's lives. Lovers holding hands, children laughing, music spilling from restaurants. But not for him, not tonight, not anymore. He opened his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Hundreds of names: CEO, influencers, politicians. But no one he could call without it feeling like business. He didn't want to talk stocks or tech or yachts. He just wanted someone to say, "Hey, I'm glad you were born." He sighed, tossed the phone aside, and whispered to himself, 54 years, and this is what it's come to. And then came the knock. A soft, hesitant knock at the front gate, camera barely audible. Michael raised his eyebrows. He wasn't expecting anyone. He checked the security monitor. There, standing at the gate, was a young girl. Thin, dirty, maybe 13 or 14 years old. Her clothes were torn. Her shoes didn't match. Her eyes were wide, cautious, but determined. She was holding something wrapped in foil. Michael stared, confused. Why was a homeless girl standing outside a billionaire's estate, holding a foil, wrapped object like it was made of gold? He pressed the speaker. "Can I help you?" The girl looked up at the camera, swallowed hard, and said, Is this where the man lives? The one who owns all the big houses?" Michael blinked. He didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, "Yes, that's me." The girl shifted nervously, holding the foil tighter. I know this is weird, but I made you a birthday cake." Michael's heart stuttered. "What?" The girl nodded, eyes lowered. "I saw you on the news once. Said today's your birthday. I saved up coins I found to buy a cake mix. I used the shelter stove before lights out." Michael couldn't speak. This had to be some prank, right? He asked her name. She said, "Hope." She paused, then added, "My mom used to say, just because we're poor doesn't mean we can't celebrate others." Michael stared at the screen. His $1 billion mansion suddenly felt smaller than the 6x6 bed she probably slept on. He cleared his throat, tried to find words. "Would you like to come in?" Hope looked unsure, but nodded slowly. A few minutes later, Michael stood at his door as the security gates opened. Hope walked in, clutching the foil like it was a treasure. She stepped inside the foyer, eyes wide, taking in the crystal chandeliers and polished floors. But she didn't stare long. Her focus was the cake. She unwrapped it carefully, placing it on his kitchen counter. It was small, misshapen, lopsided, but it was beautiful, and on top, spelled with shaky half, melted frosting, "Happy B-Day, Mr. Big Man." Michael laughed softly. It was the first real laugh he'd felt in weeks. Hope smiled nervously. "I didn't have a candle, but I thought maybe you'd like it anyway." He stared at it, silent. Then he nodded and whispered, "This is the best gift I've ever received." Hope beamed. Michael cut 2 uneven slices and handed her one. They sat at the counter, Billionaire and homeless Gur, eating cake in a kitchen worth more than most people's lifetime income. And yet, in that moment, they were equals. No cameras, no status, no noise, just 2 souls. One searching for meaning, the other offering it without knowing. The kitchen was quiet again, but this silence felt different. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was the kind that settles in after something real happens. Michael looked at the slice of cake on his plate. Dry, uneven, slightly burnt, and yet it tasted better than anything his private chef had ever made. He glanced at Hope, who was already halfway through her piece. She ate like someone who hadn't had a full meal in days, but with manners, like someone who'd once been taught better. He asked gently, "You like baking?" Hope nodded. "My mom did. She used to let me stir the batter while she sang." Michael smiled faintly. "She sounds like a good mom." Hope looked down. She was. There was a pause, soft, delicate, fragile. Then she added, barely above a whisper, "She died last year, in the cold." Michael's heart froze. He didn't ask how. He didn't have to. He knew the streets could be cruel in the winter, especially to the forgotten. "I'm sorry," he said, the words barely leaving his throat. Hope just nodded, as if she'd heard it so many times it didn't matter anymore. She took another bite, then asked something no one had asked him in a very long time. "What about you? Where's your family?" Michael blinked. That question was a landmine. He hesitated, then answered slowly. "My parents passed years ago. No siblings, no wife, no kids, just business partners." Hope tilted her head, watching him. "But don't you get lonely?" The question hit harder than expected. Michael looked away. "I built everything thinking, if I became successful enough, people would stay." He chuckled bitterly. "They didn't." Hope didn't say anything right away. Then quietly she said, "Maybe they didn't want your money. Maybe they just wanted your time." That one line hit him like a punch to the chest. Michael stared at her. This girl, homeless, alone, half-starved, was speaking a truth no one in his millionaire circle ever had the courage to say. He swallowed hard and looked at his hands, soft, untouched by hard labor, but trembling now from something real. Hope leaned back on the stool and looked around the kitchen. "This place is beautiful, but it feels cold." Michael looked around too. It was marble and gold, polished and perfect. And yet suddenly he saw what she meant. It wasn't always this cold. He muttered, "I used to have people over, dinners, laughter, birthdays." What happened? He paused. "I outgrew them, or maybe I just outran them. I don't know anymore." Hope didn't respond. She just listened, and somehow that silence said more than any advice could. Michael stood up, walked to the living room, and motioned her to join him. The lights were dimmed low now. They sat across from each other, one on a velvet armchair, the other curled up on the edge of a leather couch, holding the last bite of cake like it was sacred. Michael broke the silence. "How long have you been on the street?" Hope hesitated. "Since I was 10. After my mom passed, foster care kicked me out for running away too much." "Why did you run?" "Because they hurt me." Michael's face dropped. Hope didn't elaborate, and she didn't need to. He felt rage stir inside him. Rage not for himself, but for her, for the systems that failed her, for the people who looked away, for the world that let a girl named Hope fall through every crack. And yet here she was, not stealing, not begging, but baking a cake for a stranger on his birthday, just to make him feel seen. Michael whispered, "You're incredible, you know that." Hope smiled faintly. My mom used to say that too, when I'd bring her flowers from the trash. Michael reached beside the couch and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was a gold watch, limited edition, never worn, worth more than some homes. He handed it to her. Hope looked at it, stunned. "I can't take this." Michael said, "It's a gift, one of many I've received that meant nothing to me, until now." She opened it gently, her fingers trembling. Then she looked at him, eyes full of something he hadn't seen in a long time. Purity. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Michael didn't hesitate this time. "Because today, you reminded me what kindness looks like." A tear slid down Hope's cheek. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed, but Michael shook his head. "It's okay, you don't have to hide that here." She smiled through it. "Then maybe you shouldn't either." Michael chuckled, and for the first time in years it didn't feel fake. They talked for hours after that, about dreams, regrets, songs her mother used to sing, about choices, silence, and what it meant to feel forgotten in a crowded world. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, Michael made a decision. He didn't want this night to be the end of a beautiful accident. He wanted it to be the beginning of something more, something purposeful. Hope had reminded him what no boardroom ever could. Connection is the only currency that never loses value. As the sun began to rise behind the city skyline, Michael asked the question that would shift both their lives forever. "Hope, how would you feel about staying here, at least for a while?" Hope froze. Her voice trembled, like, "Live here." He nodded. "We'll figure it out. I'll help you go back to school, get you a tutor, whatever you need. You gave me a gift that can't be priced. Let me give one back." She stared at him for a long time, trying to find the trap. But there wasn't one. There was just a man who'd been lost for years, finally found by a girl named Hope. Hope stared at him, frozen, the golden watch still clutched in her hand, the rising sun catching its shine just right. She had spent years learning not to trust promises, because most of them came with conditions or lies, but this one felt different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dressed in pity, it was quiet, steady, real. Michael didn't rush her, he just waited patiently, his eyes soft but unblinking, and then Hope nodded, a single shaky nod. "I'd like that," she whispered. Michael smiled, and this time it wasn't just polite, it was warm, full, alive. "Then it's settled," he said. "You stay, we begin again." That morning, something changed inside those walls. The mansion that once echoed with loneliness now carried new sounds. Tiny footsteps, shy laughter, the hum of a girl trying to find her place in a world that had always pushed her to the edges. Michael cleared out the guest room that same day, not with a call to staff, but with his own hands. For the first time in years, he lifted boxes, made a bed, folded blankets, and placed a small potted plant by the window. Something alive, just like the Hope returning to his home. Over the next few days, Hope didn't ask for anything. No clothes, no money, no new gadgets. All she asked was if she could help him cook. She didn't even know how, but she wanted to learn. And Michael, for the first time since his 20s, stepped into the kitchen without a chef. They burned the eggs, ruined the rice, set off the smoke alarm once, but they laughed. They laughed so hard, Michael had to hold the counter to keep from falling. He hadn't laughed like that in decades. He taught her how to make his mother's old soup recipe from memory. She taught him how to fold paper cranes from napkins. One day, she asked to use his laptop to fill out a school application. He said yes before she even finished the sentence. She typed slowly, but deliberately, each letter like a promise to herself. "I will not be forgotten. I will not give up. I will begin again." Michael watched her from across the room. He didn't interrupt. He didn't advise. He just watched and smiled. Hope started reading again. Old books Michael had once displayed for decor only. She'd sit in the massive library for hours, legs crossed on the floor, lost in words. He'd peek in sometimes just to hear the silence wrapped around her concentration. And every time, his heart whispered something he hadn't felt in years. This is what life is supposed to feel like. Then came the day that changed everything again. It was a Saturday morning. Hope came running into the living room barefoot, eyes wide with excitement. "Mr. Michael," she said, "can we go outside today? Like, really outside?" Michael chuckled. "You mean not the garden?" "No," she grinned. "I want to do something crazy." He raised an eyebrow. "Define crazy." Hope grinned. "I want to buy cake mix." Michael burst out laughing. "We could buy 1,000 cakes." "No," she said firmly, "I want to bake one and give it away to someone who needs it." Michael's smile faded, replaced by something deeper, something proud. They got into his car. No driver, no entourage, just two people in a car that cost more than most houses, heading toward the shelter. They walked in carrying bags of cake mix, frosting, candles, and sparkles. Hope asked the lady at the front desk, "Is it anyone's birthday today?" She said yes. A boy named Alex was turning 9. They went into the small shelter kitchen, baked together, and brought out the cake to a boy who looked like he hadn't smiled in weeks. But that day, he did, and Michael saw in Alex's eyes the same flicker he saw in Hope's when she stood at his gate days ago. Gratitude, surprise, wonder, and something else, something sacred, belonging, word spread. Not that a billionaire had donated millions, but that he'd shown up, with flour on his shirt, frosting on his hands. Hope and Michael began making it a tradition. Every week, they'd bake a cake for someone who needed to be remembered. They called it the $2 Cake Project, and within a month, it went viral, not because of marketing, not because of press releases, but because people saw what the world had been starving for: real, quiet kindness. People began sending in stories, strangers, birthdays, forgotten elderly in nursing homes, sick children, single parents. And one by one, Michael and Hope baked for them, sometimes simple cakes, sometimes burnt ones, but always full of heart. People didn't care about the recipe, they cared about the reason. Michael didn't stop at cake. He began funding shelters quietly. He built a foundation in Hope's name, the Hope Foundation for Forgotten Youth, but he made her co-founder because she wasn't just the reason he started. She was the fire that kept it going. And then came next year's birthday. Michael woke up early, but this time, he wasn't alone. Hope walked into the kitchen holding a cake. It was better than last year's, still messy, still imperfect, but beautiful, and it said in bold, candy letters, "To the man who remembered me, so I could remember myself." Michael didn't cry much in life, but that day he let himself, not because he was sad, but because he was finally full, not just of cake, not just of purpose, but of love. And as they sat together 1 year later, side by side, eating another $2 cake, Michael whispered to her, "You saved my life, Hope." She looked at him and said, "No, you just finally saw it was still worth saving." The camera zooms in on the cake, messy, homemade, imperfect, and yet, somehow, more beautiful than any designer dessert. Michael holds his fork but doesn't take the first bite. He just looks at it for a long moment, like it's more than just flour and sugar, like it's proof that sometimes life gives you second chances in the form of people you never expected to meet. Across from him, Hope swings her legs beneath the kitchen stool, smiling like a child who knows the world is finally beginning to feel safe. She doesn't ask for anything. She never has. She just gives her time, her heart, her hope. And somewhere along the way, she gave Michael something too, not just a reason to wake up, but a reason to feel again, a reason to remember what it's like to be human, when the world has turned you into a machine. Michael sets his fork down and looks straight at her. "You know," he says, voice thick with emotion, "for years I thought I was building a legacy." Hope blinks. "Weren't you?" He nods slowly. "Yes, but I was building it out of concrete and cash, not people." He pauses. "But you reminded me what real legacy is. It's not what you leave behind in a will. It's what you leave behind in someone's heart." Hope says nothing, just stares, lips quivering. Michael continues. "I used to think power came from what I could control, what I could own, but real power is what you give away." She swallows hard. "I didn't give you much, Mr. Michael, just a cake." He smiles, "And you'll never understand how much that cake saved me." The camera pans to the kitchen wall where a photo now hangs. It's of Michael and Hope at the shelter, covered in flour, laughing, holding a burnt chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Alexie" scrawled across it. That moment became more than a photo. It became a turning point not just for them, but for hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions. Because somewhere, in every town, in every broken heart, there's someone waiting to feel remembered. To feel seen, to be told you still matter. Michael stands, walks to the window, and stares out at the rising sun, the same one that once mocked his emptiness. But now it feels like a sunrise. Not just another day, but the first page of something new. He turns to Hope. "Let's bake another one." Hope tilts her head. "Another cake." He nods. "No, another story." They both smile. And as the screen fades to black, a final message appears. It was never about the cake. It was about the heart that brought it.